Hello guys, welcome to the Black Swing Global Podcast. I am Lucy.
And I'm Eugene.
And welcome to a brand new episode. Today we are continuing our Arthur Ashe special episodes. For those who are new here, we are celebrating it the entire year. And what are we celebrating, Eugene?
So this year is the 50th anniversary of Arthur Ashe winning Wimbledon. And yeah, like Lucy said, this is our second special episode on Ashe.
Yep.
And yeah, we'll be particularly focusing on his journey or the tournament he played in South Africa, which is quite a momentous trip.
Well, not just that, but we'll be celebrating his legacy of like him traveling to South Africa and what that meant in general for tennis and the history of it as well. And we are, again, still collaborating with Arthur Ashe Legacy at UCLA. So yeah, throughout the podcast, you will be hearing voice notes from people who have been around Arthur Ashe with his friends, families, whatever it is. And yeah, so this is real good, accurate information that we put together. But
extensive research again, I must say, from Lucy. So big shout out to Lucy on this.
For sure. So yeah, today is about his visit to South Africa, the impact of that. Especially that Ashe was someone that didn't want to be remembered just for tennis, but also for what he's done in the world, his impact in people and just society in general. So this was such a great topic to cover on. But most importantly, a lot of time when people talk about Arthur Ashe's legacy, they always mention the South Africa trip. Growing up, I didn't realize how much of a big deal it was. I've always heard of South Africa trip, but I think getting this podcast together, producing the things together, made me realize that, wow, okay, this was really such a big deal. And I now understand why people always bring it up. So really excited to share some key stories here. Again, a massive thank you and shout out to the Arthur Ashe Legacy at UCLA for collaborating with us and helping us put this together and putting the stories together. But of course, you never know. Some of you might not be aware of Arthur Ashe. I hope it might not be the case, but just in case, it's okay. It's all right. You can't know everything in this world. We are here to help
We've got you covered.
Educate you. So a quick intro on Ashe, a legendary player, civil rights activist and humanitarian. He was the first Black man to win a Grand Slam singles at US Open in 1968, Australia Open in 1970, and Wimbledon in 1975. He's known for his calm demeanor and strategic play, and he broke racial barriers, especially in tennis. And beyond tennis, however, he was very a vocal advocate for racial equality, education, and AIDS awareness. And as well as a very strong advocate for players' rights, which is why the first special podcast that we did was about him helping form the ATP. Yes, the whole ATP, the ATP, so that is Arthur Ashe right there. So if you have not heard the stories or known how much he had an impact on building that up, please go and watch that on our channel. I will leave the link on our description. And yeah.
Oh boy, there's a whole nother world out there. And remember, we didn't have television until 1976, I believe. So, so we were, the government, I think, didn't want it, right? Because it was a way to keep, the rest of the world out. But more importantly, not expose South Africans to what was going on, outside of the world. So I'm, said this many, many times. I think that Arthur Ashe brought the world to South Africa. And I think him coming there without any question accelerated, tearing down apartheid, because the timing of coming there in 73 and bringing the world with him, and then television, and the whole world opened up, and then you had the sanctions, right? Reagan and sanctions, and so it. But that to me was absolutely the beginning of real change.
So, Eugene, before we really start, I think it's important for people to know a little bit more about apartheid, just like a little quick intro.
So again, apartheid was a racial kind of, it was a racist system that started in South Africa, basically based on racial segregation. And it was basically enforced by the South African government in 1948. And it actually went on until 1994.
Mm-hmm.
So basically it was classified by race, and it severely impacted, black people in South Africa, who were the actual, I say were, they are the majority, and still are to this day. But yet there are still kind of, although apartheid isn't in force anymore, it's still pretty much, there's still kind of a racial system in South Africa, which you kind of will probably touch on later on as well. But that's also that played a part in kind of Ashe having difficulty getting into the country as well, which again we'll come on to later on. So you had segregated residential areas that were basically segregated by race. Millions were forcibly moved from their homes and put into like racially designated zones. Like, just saying that out loud, it just sounds ridiculous, but this actually did happen. Black South Africans as well had to carry passbooks, so like essentially passports, like on them in their own country,
to like know where they could be or where they could not
as
be,
like a form of like identification. Exactly. Like, again, which just sounds ridiculous, but that was actually in place. And also there was an inferior education system as well, that obviously severely affected, black South African children. And again, that would lead to low skilled and low wage paying jobs. And it's just really shocking, really and truly, like when you think about the history of the country, because it did set back, black people in that specific country for a long time. And you could argue it's the effects of apartheid are still being still being, it's still a thing today in terms of it's still affecting black people today in South Africa, even though it's not enforced. But the effects of it, you can still see the effects of it on the people today, which is quite sad.
I mean, he was already a huge champion. He'd won Australia twice. He'd won the US Open, the first US Open. He'd won innumerable tournaments around the world. He'd played Davis Cup. He'd won Davis Cup matches. And he had presented himself as this very calm, very dignified, very sportsmanlike and intelligent personality in the game. And he was, if you want to talk about a role model, wow, he was a role model, not just for black people, for tennis players, for sportsmen, for sportswomen, for anybody who admired people of high caliber who went about their business the way he did. Because, as we mentioned before, he was taught as a teenager never to give the white man an excuse to criticize him. And he followed that. He never put a foot wrong socially. He voiced his opinions, but not as vociferously or in such an outspoken manner as many of his black colleagues in the movement, the black movement, wanted him to. But Arthur always said, "This is how I'm doing it. You do it your way. If you want to shout and scream, go ahead. There's plenty to shout and scream about. But let me do it my way." And that South African trip really cemented him as a leader, because he'd always said, "I can't criticize South Africa until I really know what's going on, and I won't until I go there." And as we've talked about, he went and he came back and he said what he thought.
Prior to Arthur Ashe's first trip, so again, as we said earlier, the apartheid during that time was happening, and obviously South Africa still had, some sports. They had different sports teams in different fields and so on, including tennis, where they had the South African Open. So in 1969, Arthur Ashe, applied for a visa to play South Africa. And he actually was denied. And obviously some of you might be thinking, okay, due to the apartheid rule, which is probably true, but also because Arthur Ashe made like strong public statements about how he was against going to South Africa before, and like some of the about some of the things about South Africa. He wasn't that direct because obviously he hasn't been there yet, but he knew what was going on. There was even one very strong statement at like a press conference, and I think the press was actually pushing him to say something, and to a point where it was like, it was said as a joke, but the South African government did not take it like lightly and stuff. Like it was, I think even everyone else in the room was like, there's no way Arthur Ashe said this right now. But yeah, it didn't stop him though. He still applied again, and they kept denying him. The following year, he kept doing it, he kept denying it. And in addition of him like being vocal about how he felt what was happening, Ashe was one of the main advocates for South Africa's expulsion from international tennis organizations, including the Davis Cup. So he pushed the USTA, the International Lawn Tennis Federation, to take a firm stand against apartheid, which again wasn't like the only sport that was. He wasn't the only person that was actually doing this as well, or athlete. Yeah. Exactly, that's what I meant. Yeah, or athlete that was doing that. Just to show to you how much, people were really against it. But I think in terms of tennis, Ashe was definitely the one that was the most vocal about it. And with that, as a result, in 1970, under mounting international pressure, the International Lawn Tennis Federation suspended South Africa from Davis Cup competition. And again, although so many tennis players were like vocal about it, him being, he was one of the major reasons that actually happened. Definitely. Even though he was acting alone. He even went as far as to testify before Congress to actually make this happen. It just shows you how much, like, when he believed in something, he was really going to do something. And he didn't need to. Like, exactly, he could have minded his business in America and not actually do what he did.
But I think that speaks to, like, the kind of, the humanitarian side of him, which is, again, what he gets credited for, and quite rightly so.
Yeah,
like you said, he could have just been, living a happy life in America.
Yeah.
But he saw what was going on in South Africa and, used his kind of power as, I say, authority. Like he was a somebody, basically. And he used that to, enforce change or try and enforce change. So, yeah.
Yeah. And during those times as well, tennis wasn't the only sport South Africa had to deal with regarding this. So, for instance, FIFA, football, soccer for the American listeners, they banned the country for a couple of years prior, as well as the Olympics as well. And the South African government started panicking, like, all right, cool. FIFA, Olympics, now tennis, like, okay, we need to change something. They saw how this was hurting them in the sports world, but also just in the real world in general. And they were like, you know what, we need to change our image. And instead of actually just, I don't know, changing the rules or the laws, I don't know, letting everyone be free, their focus was like, no, let's just change our image externally. So even after all of that happened, after 3 visa denials, Ashe finally gets his visa approved. Although Ashe's international influence and advocacy were impossible to ignore, South Africa just wanted to avoid sports isolation and to get some PR wins, basically. To a point where Owen Williams even warned the South African government not to go on about how Arthur's visit will be a good look. If not, Ashe would not come. So, yeah, it's weird. It's like, in a good way, it's like, oh, great. They gave him the opportunity, but it's a shame that deep down it had nothing to do with, we want to invite him to our country, and more to do with like, move. Okay, guys, we're panicking. Let's get something done.
Basically performative, like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which we get a lot lately. We're not talking about that right now.
And even when Arthur Ashe came to Johannesburg in 1973, he was issued an honorary white visa, honorary white. They'd formulated this because they wanted the businessmen from Japan, who was the main commercial nation in those days, to be able to visit Johannesburg on business. Mm-hmm. So they create, and the Japs were not about to come to Johannesburg and eat in only black restaurants and stay in black hotels, which were non-existent. Mm-hmm. So they created an honorary white, and they didn't tell me that they'd issued Arthur Ashe an honorary white visa. And when he arrived in Johannesburg, we were in the car driving from Jan Smuts Airport to the home of Brian Young, where he was staying. And he said to me, "Owen, I've got to show you something." And he pulled out his passport, and there it was, honorary white. I was flabbergasted. I mean, I wanted to call the whole thing off, but of course I couldn't. I mean, it was an enormous occasion.
Before we actually continue, it's interesting how I think I touched on this a bit on the ATP podcast that we did. It's actually so interesting, and following that voice message, it's so interesting that he actually got accepted as well, or had that visa because of the whole like Japan business and everything. Yeah. Like, I would have loved to know actually how Ash felt about that, because it says on the voice note that he didn't really share his opinion. But but we get to 1973. He gets to finally gets to South Africa and plays for the South Africa Open. But even then, when Donald Dell, good friend of his, businessman, tennis guy, went to meet the Minister of Interior and Sports, he had one condition for Ash, and he said Ash cannot speak about politics. That's it. That's out of the window, which is interesting because you make him come when you know it's going to be a PR win, but you don't want him to talk, but whatever. But it's okay. Ash, he has some requests too from his side. For example, one of his main thing was, I do not want to play for a segregated audience. We know that's one. That's something that Ash always pushed for, even in the US, which is what he started off. That's how he started off the City Open, saying that, I want it there because I don't want a segregated area. I want it to be in an open space.
Washington,
I want everyone to come and watch the tennis. So he wanted that as well for when he got to South Africa. And listening to a lot of the voice note, reading some of the articles, one thing that a lot of people always said is that when he was there, he was treated like a star. Like, it was like, I don't know, like Beyonce in London or something. The
line we've got here is he was basically given an honorary white visa. So he was essentially treated like a white person.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, yeah. But also mainly because, but that's back to what we're mentioning on the voice note thing. The reason why he was given that is because of the whole like Japan thing. They're trying to change it up, but most importantly also goes back to what we were mentioning earlier about the laws. Him being able to stay in certain areas. So when he was in South Africa, a lot of times he was staying with like, in the houses of like white people, which there's a lot of like voice message where he's, some of the people were saying how he actually was very uncomfortable because in those houses, they were like maids and they were black maids and they were calling him master and stuff. And he was like, please call me Arthur, please. So, I mean, aside from the fact that it was because he had the visa, because I don't think people knew he had like the white visa thing, because himself, he didn't know until he got to got it. And but it was just the fact that, he was just a big star and he wanted to keep on calming down. But most importantly, there was one big moment during the South African Open where there was like a black child that was following him like about, who was about like 14, and he was always following him around. And then Ash was like, bro, why are you following me? Like, what's going on? And then he said that Ash was the first truly free black man I have ever seen.
That's crazy.
And that was a very like memorable moment, and it's spoken about a lot during his trip. And it just says a lot about what the South African people were dealing with.
Experiencing,
Yeah. And also during his trip, he visited Soweto, which is 17 miles from the center of Johannesburg, and was a black suburb. Some black people would have to walk into the city for work every day, and the conditions were not great. But when he was there, he was listening to residents and children and community leaders. That trip to Soweto actually really was an eye opener for him because he saw the conditions of people. He was hearing what people were going through, but you also had the press pressuring him to talk. And if we remind everyone, the government specifically told him
conditions,
do not talk about politics. So as much as there was some that were like, honored and happy that he was there was also some that were like, bro, they're just here and just listening to us say something, like help us here basically. But more specifically, obviously, remember he went for the South African Open, which he made it all the way to the finals, but he unfortunately lost to Jimmy Connors. Him either way,
he would get his own back though at Wimbledon. just saying, 2 years later, get his own back at Wimbledon. But anyway,
good one. But yeah, obviously, him playing there at a tournament had a big impact on sports and the history of South Africa. Mainly because, although this is an Arthur Ashe special, we do have to just educate the people on just one little thing about his run there at the South African Open. So Arthur Ashe is known being the first African American to play the South African Open, but this isn't actually really true. The first African American player to play at the South African Open was actually a woman, Bonnie Logan, in 1972. So just a year before. Bonnie Logan played at the Morgan State University, which is a HBCU, where she won like multiple awards and title in that field. But yeah, she's also a member of the North Carolina Tennis Hall of Fame and Black Tennis Hall of Fame. Interestingly, she actually didn't have any issues with applying for visa compared to Ashe, which you could kind of make sense. Ashe was, very vocal, a bigger player and so on. And yeah, she won, but she played at the South African Open. She did lose the first round, but she did also visit Soweto. She saw some of the things, basically whatever Arthur Ashe saw. Obviously it wasn't as big of a scale and mad people. She saw it as well, and she shared how she really felt for them, and I think she also contributed with certain stuff to try and help out and everything. But yeah, reading that was very important, and I'm really glad that we can share that story to people, definitely. Because we can't take away the impact of Arthur Ashe being there, but it is unfortunate that a lot of times people like to change history of Black women. So yeah, a massive shout out to Bonnie Logan, who is the first African American to play at a South African Open. And I hope that she likes the fact that we gave her her credit. But still, shout out to Arthur Ashe for still playing there. Be the first male.
We went into Soweto and to give a tennis clinic, and we gave a clinic for about an hour. And it was a funny configuration. There were I don't remember, there were two or three courts. And at the end of the exhibition, it was sort of normal. We would take questions and answers, and we ended up we ended up in the corner with fencing on both sides to answer questions, and it was a large crowd in Soweto. Had thousands of people. I don't know how many came to the tennis, but a lot of people went home. A lot of people stayed to talk to Arthur and ask questions, and that's what we were there for. And the questions started getting very aggressive and very angry a little bit. And so we were getting nervous because we were sort of trapped in this fencing of the tennis court. And I mean, nothing happened, but people were mad that, they were angry that Arthur was there and never, if somebody would say, well, what do you think of apartheid? He'd say, well, I'm not here to talk about politics. He didn't say the government wouldn't let him, just say, I'm not here to talk about politics. Well, that made people mad because they wouldn't know the background. So, and Richard Evans would tell you, I believe he was there that day. There was a lot of pressure, and we were really nervous to get out of there because there wasn't much protection, and we were sort of on their turf, and they were, and a lot of them, I say the people there were angry. So, not all of them, but it only takes 10% or something. You suddenly got a problem.
Right.
So we left, and I said to Arthur, this is going to happen everywhere you go, and you got to think of something broader to answer. But Arthur was great in those things, and he didn't seem very worried about. I was more worried than he was. But anyway, so we were at Jan Smuts Airport, and we were leaving, and a person approached my wife, and a man, and talked to her and said, "I want to give you this newspaper. Will you take this? If I give this newspaper to you, will you be sure and give it to Arthur Ashe personally?" She was there, and we were over here, and she said, "Well, I'm going to go to the bath. I'm going to go to the ladies' room." And he said, "Well, fine. When you come out, the newspaper is going to still be right here, and I have to leave because I don't want to be seen giving you anything. But the newspaper will be here. Will you please take the newspaper and give it to Arthur on the plane?" And we said, "Okay, no problem." I mean, there was a lot of there was a lot of bad feeling, not just about Arthur. I'm talking about the country. A lot of tension in the country. So my wife went in the bathroom, came back out. The guy was gone. The newspaper was there. She picked up the newspaper, took it on the plane, gave it to Arthur. He opened up the newspaper, and there was a handwritten letter from Winnie Mandela inside the newspaper.
Wow.
And the letter was scathing, saying, what did you ever come down here for? You're Uncle Tom. And just blasted him, saying, "We're not happy you came. Don't think, I know you're leaving, and we're glad you're leaving." I don't remember all the words. And worse than that, I don't remember where the letter went. You might ask Jeannie if it was in Arthur, because Arthur kept records of everything. And I suspect he kept that letter because it was a very strongly worded letter. And Mandela was still in jail. And this was, his wife. I mean, they were still married and active. They were still very active. And so anyway.
Wow.
So what nobody understood was what Arthur always planned was we then had like an 8 or 9 hour flight from Johannesburg to Kennedy. And I had two great writers, Frank DeFord and Richard Evans. They don't come any better, particularly DeFord. Richards was a tennis writer. DeFord was a phenomenal writer for, he won every award there is, Pulitzer Prize. So we prepared a speech for when he landed in Kennedy at a press conference, which we had organized. And when we landed, there were about 500 press people at this press release in Kennedy Airport. And, we issued a statement as to why he had gone and why he couldn't talk about it. We explained the whole thing. And then he blasted South Africa for 20 minutes and took, said you have to go to see it. These people, he just did it in a beautiful fashion. As Arthur was not a yeller. He wasn't a screamer, never. But he did it very intellectually. And then he took questions, and you can imagine. So he got everything he wanted.
That voice note is very interesting. Really interesting, mainly because I think we also touched on this on the ATP podcast that we did. How, Black Americans didn't like the fact that he wasn't speaking up as much about what was going on there, or he didn't do it in a way that they wanted him to do it. A lot of people were like loud and stuff about it, and he knew he was limited. I think the Black Americans didn't understand at that time he was limited with what he could do, which is why even himself, he said, years after, or like just before he passed away, like, listen, there's many times I wish I could crash out, like, say more, like everyone else, but I couldn't. So it's interesting how he had the pressure from the Americans and the South Africans, including, Nelson Mandela's wife,
Winnie Mandela,
saying, you came, thank you for the holiday, but say something.
A scathing letter that he received.
But I generally think, even if he didn't get that letter, he would have done it.
I agree.
I think he was just sticking to the rules of what the government was saying, where you can't talk about politics.
And again, I think he deserves major credit as well, because to kind of bring it back to like where we are today, like you have a lot of people that are in a position to make change. Like they'll speak about it, but they won't action it. Like, so they won't actually, you know, go and do the actions and the work that's required. They'll just talk and think that's good enough.
Yeah.
Whereas with Ashe, like, he not only spoke about it, he actually followed through, like, with action. So
for sure,
again, he deserves like major credit for that, and I'm glad we're kind of shining a light on that.
For sure, yeah. And one of the ways that he did that, the following year, he went back again.
Exactly.
And this time he went with other people as well, like the ambassador Andrew Young and Dr. Robert Greene. Although he was there for the South African Open again, where he actually again lost to Jimmy Connors in the finals. He's continued making headlines by meeting with township youth, holding tennis clinics. He even has like a tennis clinic, like there's one dedicated to him in Soweto as well. And continuing to speak out against apartheid and so on as well. There's one really great thing from that trip the following year, where he helped Robert Greene bring 13 Black students from Soweto to MCU for over 2 years. Basically, most of them, they finished their schooling there. And like, I think Arthur Ashe, Andrew, and Robert Greene were supposed to like go and meet Nelson Mandela, but like as a low key thing, because that trip that year, the government were not that much on Ashe's back compared to the year before, but there was a thing where apparently they were keeping an eye on him the government, there was like basically like spies around. Yeah. So I think there was even times where when he went to South Africa, whether it was that trip or after or whatever, he was like quote unquote like secretly meeting with Nelson Mandela and stuff. But there was one time where they were all supposed to go, and then a kid went to Robert Greene and was like, "Can you come to Soweto, please, so I can actually show you the real side, what's going on here?" So he let them, you know, Andrew and Arthur go. Robert goes to Soweto. He sees the stuff. He's like, "Okay, I need to find a way to help out." And one of the ways that he did that was bringing those 13 students back to America to finish their schooling, and because he really wanted to help. And Ashe contributed to that by helping fund those things. Yeah, it wasn't just being there and speaking up. He was also doing things in action, whether it's, you know, spraying that money, whether it's being there in person, whether it's helping people in either way, but helping them, giving them inspiration. But yeah, those two trips, I know a lot of people talk about the first trip a lot. I think that second trip as well contributed a lot as well, because it helped. Yeah, it did a lot there. He was able to do a lot more things compared to his first trip. So yeah.
And so were there any other highlights to the trip before you all head back to the U.S.?
Not really. My concern was Soweto and the living conditions of Black in Soweto, and getting paperwork done for, I think we brought 13 Black South Africans back. Zach Chuaney was one who's now dean. No, he's a medical doctor. There's another Black who's dean of one of the schools in South Africa. Wow. My concern then was to get as much information on them to make it easier for me to get them back to Michigan State. And we did. We were able to do that.
Did you have any issues with their visas or getting permission for them to leave the country?
Not really, no.
Okay.
And I remember bringing in one of the Black South African leaders. I can't think of his name offhand. And he spoke at Michigan State, and I got him an honorarium of, I think, $1,000. And in those days, $1,000 was a lot of money. And I was trying to figure out how to get it back, the money back to South Africa. He didn't want to carry it back. So I went to the head of the East Lansing State Bank, who was white, president, I knew him well. And he took him a whole day, but he figured out how to get that $1,000 back into South Africa to this man's family. And he was so happy. So I did a little thing. To me, that was a big victory.
That was a huge victory. Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we did a little bit of justice to talk about how
definitely.
important that trip was. But yeah, the impact of Arthur Ashe going to South Africa, he has done a lot in the historical context. Broke racial barriers by being one of the first African American to play at the South African Open. He spoke publicly about apartheid, which again was something that at that time was like a big no-no. Enforced not to have segregated crowd when he was playing at South African Open, changed sports activism, told the tennis people, listen, South Africans cannot play any of these, international like tennis tournaments and stuff.
It's very similar like today in terms of like when you look at Russian athletes, like obviously they're allowed to play, but they can't represent the flag, or they can't play under the Russian flag, like. Yeah. So why I mention that is because like you still have like kind of politics and sports like intertwined.
True. Yeah, that's a good point. Definitely, yeah.
Which is also quite interesting. But I think again, like you've said here, like Ashe definitely paved the way in terms of being an activist, but also like a top athlete. Because again, now it's so easy for athletes to kind of speak freely about like their political views or
that's true.
Things away from sports that. You have some people saying, "Oh, just stick to playing sports," or keep politics. But no, like we're in a time now where athletes can comfortably do that and share, their views and opinions. And a lot of it is basically because of Arthur Ashe. So
honestly, yeah, and it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning. Like going through these stories, I understood so much. Like, okay, now I get why this was like such a big deal, because I kind of feel like everyone before was always saying, when Arthur Ashe visited South Africa, but I don't think people went that much into details about like the impact like of it, how much is like a big deal.
No, definitely. I think that also plays into his personality, because he was very like understated, low key.
Yeah.
So like
his type of activism wasn't like that. He always like said it. He was like, he kind of found it a bit performative.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like when people are like so like loud about it, like he had his own calm.
He was like the background guy, making things happen at the background, but like also being a powerful like voice, because he had that authority.
Exactly.
So for me, that is the most effective like way if you want to like affect change. Do it that way. Like use your, I say privilege. I mean, he wasn't privileged. He was a black man in a a tough world, but
I feel like it was still such a risk.
No, of course.
Exactly. Which goes back to what I was saying, where I wish like some people gave him a little bit more grace. And when I mean the people, I'm talking about the people that will complain about him not talking about like politics and stuff.
Because it's complicated, yeah.
Yeah, because I remember even when I was putting this together, I think one of the reason why he had a position, can't remember which position it was. It wasn't when he was president of the ATP. But he had like a position in one of like I'll probably leave a note on the screen if I remember this. And it was like apparently it wasn't a thing. They didn't really say to him like, hey, because of your activism stuff, you can't be, we need you to move to the side a little bit. Yeah. I will put in, if you are watching this, please see the note on the screen.
I'm intrigued.
I'm sorry, it just slipped out my mind. But yeah, listen, that wasn't the only time that he did that. For the next 20 years, he spoke out against apartheid, giving speeches about the issue, endorsing international sanctions against South Africa, and he kept actually encouraging players to not play there as well. Even when as far as to like a couple years after, in 1985, he was arrested for protesting apartheid in front of the South African embassy in Washington. And that protest was basically like a movement by the anti-apartheid movement. And there were a worldwide effort to end South Africa's apartheid regime and its oppressive policies of racial segregation. Again, like you said earlier, although apartheid is not like, legally like a thing in force, it's still a topic today, a certain president at the moment, is trying to flip the story and trying to make it seem like apparently, the white South Africans that are there are the ones that are facing discrimination, when you know, the Black South Africans are like, no, we need to get our stuff back. You know, like we mentioned the rules and the laws earlier, the things that I had to deal with, and it's nowhere near the same as to what the white people there are dealing with right now. I think it's just they are scared that the Black South Africans are fighting for their rights and fighting for what they deserve and their lands and things that their ancestors have, you know, had to deal with. But it's really crazy that in 2025, that's a conversation.
It's wild. It's actually wild.
It's actually insane.
I was reading, well, I say reading, you can't really avoid it if you kind of follow the news. But yeah, in America anyway, most recently, I think it was back in May, they allowed, I think it was like 44 white South African farmers into America, like under like refugee, like, or asylum seeker status. Because yeah, according to them, and again, these reports are like, to use, you know, Donald Trump's favorite phrase, it's fake news. Like, there's reports of white South Africans being under attack by basically black people. So they're in fear of their life, like running away from the country, when that's just not the case. And like, there aren't any credible statistics to like back that up. Yeah. I've got one thing I want to read actually from a BBC report. I'm just trying to find the actual sentence because it blew me away. Just about the figures and just to show you how ridiculous, like, in terms of the present time we're in today. Let me just find the sentence. I should have highlighted it. Okay, yeah. So, this is a report on the BBC's website, so BBC News. So it says, figures from South African police show that in 2024, 44 murders were recorded on farms or smaller plots of agricultural land, with 8 of those killings being farmers. South Africa does not report on crime statistics broken down by race, but a majority of the country's farmers are white, while other people living on the farms, workers, are mostly black. So in terms of the kind of why that struck me was the fact that, of course, yes, the majority of farmland is actually owned by white South Africans, whereas the major population in South Africa is black. But yet, I think black people own, or black South Africans own like 4% of like land, whereas what's that? The remaining 96 is owned by the minority, which is just doesn't add up. Yeah, like so. And this is what I'm saying. This is in 2025. Yeah. So I to bring it back to Ash, I would love to think, or I would love to know how he would feel about like the current state of South Africa now, kind of, you know, visiting the country in 1974, 1975, when things, you know, apartheid was enforced, to like now where it's not, but yet there's still like the kind of divide and like segregation in place. For sure. Like, but obviously it's not called apartheid. Yeah. It's just sad, like, really and truly.
It really is. It honestly is. But it again, just, I think it's just sad more again that it just did not change. It has not changed in all different ways. But I'm glad that at least it's not like a law thing compared to like before. Yeah. Like, at least that aspect has changed. And at least now more people can be vocal. Like, for example, we wouldn't be able to talk like that really like before, like, you know, but imagine? I'm really glad that we did, but not just in terms of like celebrating Arthur Ashe and the impact that he did, but also reminding people the history of South Africa, what they have dealt with, especially in these times where everyone can just make up fake news and stories, even if you rule one of the biggest countries in the world. Crazy. But yeah, but I think we did justice.
No, I agree.
I think we did justice. But yeah, and I hope you guys did enjoy the podcast. And yeah, just a reminder that we will be at Wimbledon this year on the grounds all day, every day. And during that time, we'll still be celebrating. So make sure you stay tuned to our daily podcast on site, where we'll be shining lights on the Black players that will be attending at Wimbledon, and also still celebrating Arthur Ashe's Wimbledon anniversary win.
She got it right. I like that.
I got it right.
No, I mean, it's like I've always said, I think, in my opinion, I think Arthur Ashe was probably most responsible for the change in breaking down apartheid in South Africa, certainly in sports, certainly, again, my opinion that he really did bring the world to South Africa. And, incredibly grateful to have known him, to have been, in a way, witnessed that legacy and, to see it still continue, with the Arthur Ashe Tennis Center in South Africa, to know Jeannie, to, have the Billie Jean King National Tennis Center connected to the Arthur Ashe Stadium, to have seen Althea Gibson acknowledged at the US Open finally with an unbelievable statue. So, I think I've lived in an amazing time where I've witnessed change, but also in a way been a small part of playing it forward and continuing to do that. And, I still have many wonderful relationships with Black South Africans who, were on that journey with me. And, it was a very special time. And Arthur really made a difference. He really did.